On this pleasant May afternoon, I'm standing here on one of the historic sites of Johnson County, the site where the town of Napoleon once was located. The grand sounding name of Napoleon. No one knows where it got its name, no one knows who named it or when it was named, but they certainly did give it a grand sounding name, Napoleon. The site where I'm standing is located 2 miles south of the center of Iowa City, the center of the business district. I hasten to add that Iowa City was not there at the time because Napoleon was established on July 4th, 1838, when the first courthouse was built here. That was one of the things that Napoleon was famous for. It was the site of the first courthouse. It's located on the Sand Road, the east side of the Iowa River, and actually the town of Napoleon bordered on the west on the Iowa River. It's on the farm of, it was on the farm of Philip Clark, who was one of the first pioneers in Johnson County. And Clark and John Gilbert, the Indian trader, were both very anxious that the courthouse be at this location, and they pushed forth all their efforts to get it located here. Philip Clark arranged for a surveyor from Muscatine to come up to his farm and lay out the town of Napoleon. And it was quite a pretentious town that they had planned, because Clark had visions of this not only being the county seat of Johnson County, but it might possibly end up being the capital of the new territory of Iowa. So they laid it out, and there were streets, and there were provisions for parks, for schools, for churches. There was even a boat landing down on the Iowa River, which is just beyond the trees here. So they had great plans for it, and the settlers in the area were also very anxious that the courthouse be at this site. There were rival courthouses, sites in the county, but these men were very influential, and they wanted the courthouse to be right over here, just a little beyond where the camera is. And these settlers didn't wait for the county to build the courthouse. They chipped in. They chipped in enough money to build a very creditable courthouse, 20 feet by 32 feet. It was a frame building, 2 stories. It had windows. It was really quite a, as I say, a creditable building for the times. And the second the second thing that Napoleon was famous for was the fact that it was the first post office in Johnson County. That was in March 1839 that it was named the post office, and President Martin Van Buren of the United States named John Gilbert, the old Indian trader, to be the first postmaster. So those were 2 of the things that the town of Napoleon was famous for. And it also was famous for something that happened here 143 years ago. And that was May 1st, 1839. That January of 1839, the Governor Robert Lucas and the territorial legislature were meeting in Burlington. And one of the things that one of the acts that they provided was that the governor should appoint a committee of 3 commissioners to select a new site for a permanent site for the capital of the territory of Iowa. Burlington was just the temporary capital. And so Governor Lucas named Chauncey Swan of Dubuque, John Ronalds of Louisa County, which has Wapello as a county seat, and Robert Ralston of Des Moines County. Burlington was a county seat of that. All of these men were from close to the Mississippi River, because the territory of Iowa didn't extend too far inland at that time. So the men were to meet May 1st here at Napoleon at the courthouse. And at the appointed hour, Chauncey Swan, the dependable Chauncey Swan, was here on time. But neither Ronalds nor Ralston arrived on time. And so Swan waited and waited, and then many of the settlers came up because they were all interested in seeing that this would be the new capital of Iowa, of the territory. And so they stood and talked and visited, and the hours went by, and then Swan looked up when the sun was just about overhead, looked at his watch. It was getting towards noon, and he asked for volunteers to go south to Louisa County and get John Ronald so that they could have a quorum and make the meeting official. So Philip Clark volunteered to go to down to Louisa County and get John Ronald. And he left about noon, and there was some apprehension as to whether he could get back in time to make the meeting official. So he started out, and the settlers visited in the courthouse with Chauncey Swan. And as time went on, they got more and more nervous, of course. And evening came, it got dark. They knew it would be a long time before Philip Clark and Ronalds could get back. But they did get a little apprehensive, and every so often someone would step outside of the courthouse and listen for hoofbeats. And then finally, about 11 o'clock, someone stepped out. A little after 11, they stepped out, and they did hear hoofbeats in the distance. And then everybody came outside of the courthouse, and when Philip Clark and John Ronalds rode up to the courthouse, there was a great cheer went out. Swan glanced at his watch, and he saw that there was time for the commissioners, for the two of them, to be sworn in officially. And Robert Walker, the first Justice of the Peace of Johnson County, swore them in, and they had an official meeting just before midnight, and then they adjourned until the next day. The rest is history. Swan and Ronalds went out and looked over the different sites, and eventually Ronalds got here, and as you know, they selected the site where Old Capitol is today, and the site for Iowa City adjacent to that. So that was the third important thing that happened with the town of Napoleon. There was much that transpired in this area prior to the establishment of Napoleon. This is where the first settlers settled, probably because it was close to Muscatine and possibly because it was close to Burlington. John Gilbert was the first white man to trod the soil of this area. He came to Johnson County in 1826, long before any other white men. John Gilbert was the Indian trader, and he was sent here as the agent for the American Fur Trading Company. And he was sent to this point to establish a trading post here because of the Indian villages that were here. Poweshiek's Indian village was a mile or two south of here. There were 1,700 Indians there. And then in his sub-chiefs of Indian village, just to the south of where I'm standing, was Wapashiek's Indian village, and there were 1,000 Indians in that in that Indian village. So John Gilbert was sent here for that reason. Gilbert had come from New York. He was a well-educated man, intelligent man, very personal, man of character. For some reason, though, he'd had to leave back east. He came out here. He changed his name from Prentice to Hall, and first he was with the American Fur Trading Company in Michigan. Up there he learned the Indian language, or he learned some phases of it, and so they sent him out here in 1826 to take charge of their trading post down below. John Gilbert was on very friendly terms with the Indians. He got along well with them. When they were negotiating their treaties with the U.S. government, he went to Rock Island with them, to where it was then called Fort Armstrong. He helped them negotiate their treaties. At one time when he was down there in 1836, he met two men from Elkhart, Indiana, who had come west. They were looking for Iowa land. And so John Gilbert said to them, well, if you'll come with me, I'll show you some fine Iowa land which you can stake out for your own. That was 1836, and so Philip Clark, who owned this farm where we're standing now, 742 acres, came with him, and also Eli Myers. They were the first two white men to come to this area and stake out their claims. So they staked out their claims in 1836, and John Gilbert says, I'll watch these and see that no one else selects the same sites. You come back next spring. So in the next spring, Philip Clark and Eli Myers came back. they brought their families with them, their tools, and they settled down in this area. Well, now there were white men in the area, and John Gilbert thought, well, the 4th of July is coming up, we should celebrate. So Gilbert sent Henry Felkner to Muscatine to get 3 barrels of whiskey to celebrate the 4th of July. And so he invited in 13 or 14 of the white settlers that had come to the area for this 4th of July celebration. The program of the day was for, after each drink, for every man at one time or another to either make a speech, sing a song, or tell a story. And they say that before the day was over, there had been a great deal of bacchanalian fun. Well, anyhow, John Gilbert continued on here with his trading post. By that time, he had his own trading post rather than working for the American Fur Company, knowing that he could make more money that way. He traded the Indians for their hides and their furs, and he supplied them with guns and the things that Indians could not make themselves, but they needed to get from the white men. So he proceeded there for the rest of the year, and then the day after he was named postmaster, that was in March 1839, he died. His friends buried him. They had a funeral service. Chief Paushik, his friend, came, some of the other Indians. They buried him in a walnut casket just outside of his trading post, south of here, and they had this service. And then in a couple of years, some of his friends, Philip Clark, Eli Myers, and others, decided that that was no place for a man so important to this area to be buried, because the trading post would soon be gone. So they removed his bones to Oakland Cemetery. They buried him up there, and they put a slab on top of the grave, marking that this is where John Gilbert, the Indian trader, was buried. Then in a few years, vandals went through. They pulled out the wooden marker, and so today, John Gilbert, the first man to trod the soil of Johnson County, lies in an unmarked grave in Oakland Cemetery in the older part. But the longest street in Iowa City, Gilbert Street, is named after John Gilbert, and his name lives on. We're now standing in front of the William H. Norton House. This is the house that was built by James McAllister. He bought the farm from Philip Clark in 1863. It was his idea that this would be a wonderful place to farm and to live. And so he decided he would build a house up on the hill, the house that is behind me here now. And so Jim McAllister, while he was building the back part of this house, lived in the old courthouse, which was just across the road here, not very far from where we are today. And the courthouse was still standing at that time. Of course, today it's all torn down. There's nothing over there. But when they were tearing it down, Bud Lewis did pick up 7 of the stones that were part of the foundation. They weighed about 300 pounds. And so he has taken them up to his house so that he'll have those stones to commemorate the first courthouse of Johnson County. Well, anyhow, the Jim McAllisters lived in the first courthouse when while they were building the back part of this house in 1864. In 1880, James McAllister built the front part of the house, the beautiful part that you see behind me, and that was built, well, just a little over 100 years ago. And the McAllisters and the Showers family continued to live there until 1975. In fact, there were 3 or 4 generations that lived there. McAllister and his daughter, who married a Showers, and then Charlie Showers, who was the 3rd generation, and he lived here for many years, and his children also lived in the house, a 4th generation. One of those children is now living in Iowa City, still lives in Iowa City, Mrs. Leon Portia Showers Cooper. So this house was in the Showers family, for Showers and McAllister family, for 111 years. And McAllister also built a very fine barn off over here. I believe the cost of that barn was around $5,000. It was one of the largest barns in the entire area. So the two owners of this farm, Philip Clark and Jim McAllister and the Showers family, are the only two owners from 1837 until 1975. There never was a mortgage on the farm. Then after the Showers decided that it should be sold, they sold off this house and 10 acres to the William H. Nortons. And the Nortons live here now, and they're restoring it back to something of what it was originally. They're also doing much work on the barn, trying to restore it. There's a tremendous amount of work in a place of this size. So it has been a very historic place in Johnson County, right across from the town of Napoleon, which played such an important part in the early history of this area. Thank you.